Unleashed a lifetime of resentment over dinner, exposed my father's affairs, and cut ties with my parents defending my cheating ex-fiancé. So I've lost my cool with my 27F parents, 57F, 59 male, for pushing me to forgive my cheating ex. I was to be married in July. 2 months ago I came home from a work trip to find my ex-fiancé in bed with my BFF's sister. I kicked him out, cancelled the wedding, warned him I would get rid of his stuff if he didn't come get it all, then weeks later dumped it, all on the curbside with a free sign, sold or donated or dumped everything he gave me, and pawned the ring. I blocked him everywhere. Called the cops on him when he showed up, after I gave his stuff away, banging on my door, called them again when he turned up at my workplace and made a scene, and called them on his family when they showed up en masse to plead his case. I didn't go scorched earth on ex-BFF's sister. I did tell her husband I caught her in bed with my ex. Last I heard she'd been kicked out of the house and was back living with her parents. Ex-BFF tried talking me into giving them both a chance to explain. What? No, then got angry at me for ruining her sister's relationship, called me petty and cold-hearted. So I kicked her to the curb too. I don't want dishonest people that are blasé about betrayal in my life. This encounter no doubt simmered under my skin until I unleashed on my parents. Maybe that's the reason, because it lingered, I was so harsh with them. Last week I met my parents for dinner. I took a date with me to the restaurant hoping his being there would waylay any discussion about my failed engagement. My parents have been pressuring me to work things out with the ex. He's so sorry. I owe it to him to talk with him. Give him 5 minutes to explain himself. She meant nothing to him, he made a mistake. I'm cruel for shutting him out the way I have. How could I call the police on him? How could I do the same to his family? His parents? They're good people, they didn't deserve to be humiliated in that manner. He's having a rough time. He's depressed. Everybody is worried about him. He loves me, really loves me. He's learned his lesson. It's time to grow up and forgive him. No. My date's presence didn't stop them from bringing it all up again. I lost my cool, asked my father if he expected me to give my ex a pass every time he sticks his dick into anything that moves. Like he does. I asked my mother how turning a blind eye to her husband's infidelity works for her. How does she hold her head up while having lunch with women that have slept around with her husband for years? Is that the kind of man, the life she wants for me and my sister? For her daughters? I asked if they had any idea of the impact that knowledge had on me and my siblings growing up. Knowing that dad was late home from work because he was screwing his secretary. Knowing work weekend was code for dirty weekend with a woman not our mother. Did they not know why it was that of their 4 children, I am the only one that still talks to them? Do they not question why they were not invited to my brother's weddings? Why they have never met either of my brother's wives and children? Do they think my sister's silence is because she's being dramatic and throwing a tantrum? Really? I stood from the table, congratulated them on the loss of their last, remaining child, and told them I hoped their arrogance, willful blindness, and misery was a comfort them to their last breaths. Then I left. My date, I should have saved him for a proper date rather than a F you to my parents, took me to the nearest bar, let me cry on his shoulder while I proceeded to get shit-faced, then made sure I got home safely. The next day he messaged me to see if I was alive and sent a double cheeseburger, large fries, and a large Sprite over with DoorDash. I didn't block my parents but I haven't heard from them. It's been a week and I've calmed down enough to feel regret. Not for what I said, but because I can see the looks on their faces when I made my final farewell. I crushed them, hurt them, especially my mother. Despite their faults, and there are many, I love my parents. I don't like knowing I hurt them, I'm feeling a lot of guilt about it. Ida? Update 1. It's been a minute since I was here last. Life has been busy, work has been busy, and updating Reddit wasn't on my mind. Apologies to all those that continue to send messages asking for an update. I figure better late than never. A quick recap. Lost my temper with my parents when they tried to push me to forgive and reconcile with my cheating ex. Some really hurtful and harsh truths were shared by me to them in the moment. Afterwards I felt tremendous guilt. The regret started to eat at me. Where to start? First, a thank you to all who replied to my post. I tried to read every comment, and though I didn't post for the validation most of you gave, receiving it did lighten the load a little bit. It didn't take away from the guilt I carried, but I was able to work through that to see that although my timing was off, what I said was absolutely necessary. Thank you, too, to some of those that sent me private messages rather than posting on the main thread. Having read your own stories of a similar upbringing, conversing with you has helped me to understand that my childhood and teens were traumatic. That those years left wounds that I'd never addressed until this all came about. One more shout out to those that sent harassing messages about my choices, those people that preached about the sanctity of marriage, and how men are basic creatures with basic needs. Those that attempted to school me in how to be a woman that needs to lean to do my duty by allowing a man his vices, and that it was really all my fault for not supporting my ex in his time of need. Special shout out to the men that offered to teach me how to be submissive, and learn my place in this world. And last but not least, the sweet little chicken nugget that told me my reaction was proof that I am a serial cheater and my ex should have used a cattle prod on my happy place. It must have been tough for all of you when your women left. Big props to those ladies for escaping a life of misery with you. Now for what has happened since. My mother left my father not long after my post. Maybe a couple of weeks after. She showed up at my apartment one night with her luggage. I can't explain how broken and pitiful she was. I brought her inside, held her, and my heart broke for her. I realized then that she had no one she could turn to, absolutely no one. No family, no friends. I cannot help but wonder if she had been all alone for all the years of her marriage, and if me or one of my siblings had said something sooner, would she have had the courage to leave my father then? I'd never seen my mother, usually so dignified and unruffled, look so broken. It shocked me to see her that way. It worried me so much that I made her sleep in my bed with me. I called my siblings and within days they all came to show support and love. Then it was me, my mother, and my sister sleeping in my bed. It was good for her to see that her children still cared. Because we did care, we did love her. It was the situation my siblings distanced themselves from. At first my mother stayed with me. She was having a hard time of it. Years of humiliation, shame and guilt ate at her. I was worried about her state of mind and didn't like to leave her alone. I couldn't take time off work to be with her every second of the day, so I took her to the shelter and we got her a dog. My thinking was if she had something to take care of, it would distract her from dark thoughts. I was hoping for a puppy because they're playful and would keep her busy, but she fell in love with a 5-year-old mixed breed, and he fell right back. He's a goof. We don't know how it happened, but we woke up one night to him howling because he had somehow wedged his head in between the spindles on the stairs. His whole head. We had to call the fire department to rescue him. Of course my mother didn't think he was at fault and she now refers to him as her baby. He adores my mother though. My oldest brother moved some things around then moved her across the country to live with him and his family. He thought she would do better if there was no chance of her running into dad or one of his many women. He found her a therapist and that seems to be working. She is loving being a grandmother and all reports are that she is an indulgent one. She has a separate in-law suite so she gets to see them every day. My brother tells me when the kids go missing, they can now be found at grandma's. My dad is my dad. He doesn't lack for company. I had a dinner with him not long after my mother moved across the country where he introduced me to the new woman in his life. I reminded them both that I knew exactly who she was considering she called my mother her best friend for all my life. Cue another awkward dinner. My dad tried to make it as pleasant as he could but whenever she spoke to me I would bring up a memory from my childhood of her spending time with our family and ask if she was sleeping with my father all the way back then. The next day he called to tell me how disappointed he was with me. I felt it only fair to share my own disappointments. We argued for a bit. He tried to downplay all he had done over the years, tried to play the victim of his own actions. I ended up cutting the conversation short and blocking him. It was just over a month ago when he showed up at my door. I wouldn't let him in and I'm sure that rattled him some. He told me he didn't want to lose me too. Say what you want about him but he is my dad. I love him. I don't want to lose him either. He promised he wouldn't force me to interact with any of his women. So far we have had a couple of pleasant outings that have gone well so far. I am cautiously hopeful that we can continue to be in each other's lives. As for me, well, I took that advice some of you gave me and I am in therapy. It is humbling to come to the realization that though you may think you're fine, you are, actually, not. It has been almost unbearable to face all that history, and excruciatingly painful to dig through it all. At the end of some sessions all I want to do is head to the nearest bar and drink until I forget all about what I just went through to find out where it all started, and why I am the way I am. I think therapy is one of the most difficult things I have ever done. I don't know how some of you have been doing it for as long as you have. I also don't know why you do it so willingly. I'm a crazy nutter for listening to all you nutters in the first place. But it is helping. Now, for the update most of you want. I cannot even tell you how many messages I continue to receive from people wanting to know about him. It was almost like you all were saying, girl, we don't care about whatever life crisis you're going through, just tell us about the date. Well, I haven't replied to any of those queries because my post wasn't about him. Now, I figure, in a roundabout way, I owe you something because you all played a part in where we are today. I won't give a rundown of everything that has happened between us but I will give you a few things. He contacted me after seeing a podcast on YouTube. He sent me a link with the query, is this you? It would be an understatement to say I was mortified. My mortification kept me from replying to him. I was so deep in my embarrassment that I didn't even bother to read the messages he sent me over the next couple of weeks. When I finally did read them it was to find a whole heap of screenshots of people's comments. I'm going out on a limb by saying you don't need me to tell you the contents of the comments he was sending me. I eventually got back to him. It was difficult for us to make time to see each other. As I stated earlier, my life, both personal and professional, has been busy. He also has a life and work. We were only able to meet up for coffee a couple of times. I didn't think we were going to be able to grow a friendship, let alone anything beyond that. I've since learned that he is tenacious and persistent. Like a dog with a bone. He kept at it until we found time to go on a second date. That date went well and led to another. Then another. Then he introduced me to the two most important people in his life. His grandparents. His grandfather carves little wooden figurines and I have since acquired a flock of wooden birds. His grandmother thinks I'm too skinny. She feeds me whenever I see her, and usually sends me home with food. He gets along with my sister and brothers. He came with me to visit my mother on her birthday and met them all. He was very gracious with her. I had him saved in my phone as Cheeseburger. He took issue with that because he bought me a double cheeseburger, so I started calling him Double Cheese, and then shortened that to DC. He is still saved in my phone as Cheeseburger. He's an undercover Swiftie and I don't quite know what to do with that. I don't have anything against Taylor Swift, but I sure didn't pick him to love her. He did use his little sister and niece's cover for his Taylor Swift love. Now he uses me. I am fine with being so used. Update 2. I don't even know where to begin since so much has happened since my last update. I guess I'll start with the simple stuff before diving into the absolute rollercoaster my life has become. First off, DC and I are still together. It's been about 6 months now and honestly, I'm still caught off guard sometimes by how easy it is with him. He moved in with me a couple months ago when his lease ended, and I was terrified it would be too fast, too soon. But living with him has been surprisingly normal. He doesn't leave wet towels on the floor, always replaces the toilet paper, and somehow knows I'm having a bad day before I do. Remember how I mentioned he's an undercover Swiftie? Well, he managed to score tickets to one of her shows. I spent 3 hours watching him sing every single lyric with more passion than the teenage girls around us. His little sister and niece were with us too, and the 3 of them had matching homemade t-shirts. I've never seen a grown man so happy to wear glitter. My mom is doing really well with my brother's family. She's become the neighborhood grandma and apparently hosts a weekly book club that's more of an excuse for the ladies to drink wine and gossip. Her dog has gained 15 pounds because everyone in the neighborhood feeds him treats. My brother had to put him on a diet, but my mom sneaks him chicken when no one's looking. She started dating again too, nothing serious, just coffee with a widower from her book club. It makes me happy to see her smiling again. Now for the complicated part. My ex. About 2 months ago, I was having lunch with a colleague when I felt someone hovering by our table. I looked up and there he was. He'd lost weight, grew a beard, looked like he hadn't slept in days. He asked if he could speak to me for 5 minutes. I was about to tell him to go to hell when my colleague, who knew the whole story, offered to step outside to make a call. I reminded him that the last time he showed up at my workplace, I called the police. I know, he said. I just need 5 minutes and I'll never bother you again. Against my better judgment, I gave him 5 minutes. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. He just said he was moving across the country for a job and wanted to give me something before he left. He pulled out a small envelope and pushed it across the table. Inside was a check for half the cost of our cancelled wedding along with a handwritten note that just said, I can't undo what I did, but I can try to repay what it cost you. I hope you find happiness with someone who deserves you. I sat there staring at the check long after he left. I still don't know how I feel about it. I told DC about the encounter that night. I expected him to be upset or jealous or something, but he just asked what I wanted to do with the money. I said I wasn't sure if I should even cash it. It's not about the money, DC said. It's about whether accepting it helps you move forward or ties you back to him. This is why I'm with this man. As for my ex-BFF and her sister, I ran into them at a mutual friend's birthday party last month. The sister avoided me like I was contagious, but my ex-BFF cornered me in the bathroom. She was drunk and emotional, telling me how her sister's life fell apart after her husband left her. She lost her job, had to move back home, the whole sad story. I listened, then simply asked, and how exactly is any of that my fault? She didn't have an answer. I walked out and rejoined DC at the party. Later, I saw her quietly observing us from across the room. I caught her eye and she mouthed I'm sorry before leaving early. The strangest twist involves my dad. He's still my dad, still dating women half his age, still thinking he's God's gift to the female population. But he's been making an effort. He calls once a week, remembers important dates, and hasn't tried to introduce me to any of his lady friends. Last week, he called to tell me he's been diagnosed with prostate cancer. It's treatable, they caught it early, but it's been a wake-up call for him. He asked if I would come with him to his first treatment. I said yes. When I told DC about it, he immediately offered to take time off work to drive us both to the appointment. I told him it wasn't necessary, that I could handle it. I know you can handle it, he said. But you don't have to handle it alone anymore. And isn't that the whole point? Finding someone who doesn't make your life harder when it's already hard enough? Therapy is still kicking my ass. Every session feels like emotional surgery without anesthesia. My therapist says I have healthy boundaries with unhealthy origins. Apparently, I'm good at protecting myself but terrible at letting people in because I learned early that love and betrayal go hand in hand. She asked me what was different about DC. Why I let him in when I've kept everyone else at arm's length. Because he showed up with a cheeseburger when I was hungover, I said. She laughed, but I was serious. When I was at my lowest, embarrassed about my public meltdown, nursing a hangover and my wounded pride, he didn't offer empty platitudes or unwanted advice. He sent food. He checked if I was okay. He met me exactly where I was without expecting anything in return. That's it. That's the whole secret. In therapy, I'm working on forgiving, not my ex, not my father, but myself. For the years I spent thinking I had to earn love by being perfect, for believing that if I was good enough, smart enough, pretty enough, no one would ever hurt me. For blaming myself when they did anyway. DC bought me a bracelet for my birthday last month. It's nothing fancy, just a simple silver band with double cheese engraved on the inside. I wear it every day. When I'm having a bad day, I touch it and remember that sometimes the best things come from the worst moments. I still have nightmares sometimes. I dream I come home and find DC with someone else. I wake up shaking, and he's there, confused and sleepy, asking what's wrong. I tell him, and he just holds me until I fall back asleep. The other night, I asked him if he ever worries that I'll go scorched earth on him someday. Only if I deserve it, he said, then fell back asleep like he hadn't just summarized our entire relationship in 5 words. I don't know what the future holds. I'm still figuring out how to be a daughter to parents who are essentially strangers to me now. I'm learning how to trust again. I'm discovering that healing isn't linear, and some days are harder than others. But I do know one thing, I'm never settling again. Not for someone who makes me question my worth, not for relationships that drain me, not for a life that looks good on paper but feels empty inside. Update 3. It's been almost a year since my last update, and I'm still not used to how quickly life can change. So much has happened that sometimes I forget who I was before all of this started. I'll start with my dad. The cancer treatments were rougher than any of us expected. I went with him to every appointment, watched as he grew thinner, weaker, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. There's something humbling about watching your parent, the one who seemed invincible your entire childhood, struggle to button their own shirt. During one particularly bad week, I stayed at his place to help him. While he was sleeping, I cleaned up a bit and found a box of old photos in his closet. Pictures of all of us, me, my siblings, my mother, from when we were young. Family vacations, birthdays, school events. I was struck by how happy we all looked, how normal. I confronted him about it when he woke up. Were you ever actually happy with us? I asked him. He was quiet for a long time. Those were the happiest days of my life, he finally said, and I ruined them because I couldn't appreciate what I had while I had it. I'm not sure if I believe him, but I think he believes it now. Funny how perspective shifts when mortality enters the chat. He's in remission now. The doctors are cautiously optimistic. He's even started volunteering at a cancer support group, which is both surprising and somehow perfectly in character. My father, the eternal charmer, now channeling those powers for good. He's still seeing women, but he's been with the same one for 6 months now, a doctor he met during treatment. She's his age, divorced, and takes exactly 0 of his bullshit. I actually like her. My mother has fully blossomed in her new life. She's become an entirely different person, or maybe this is who she always was beneath the fear and shame. She cut her hair short, dyed it a soft silver, embracing the gray, she calls it, and started wearing bright colors instead of the muted tones she wore throughout my childhood. She's also started painting. My brother converted part of his garage into a studio for her, and she spends hours there creating these vibrant, abstract landscapes. They're actually good, so good that a local gallery asked to display some of her work. At the opening, she gave a little speech about finding yourself later in life, and there wasn't a dry eye in the place. Her dog is still overweight despite everyone's best efforts. My brother installed a doggy door, and the little trader has figured out how to visit the neighbors for extra treats. He's basically the mayor of the neighborhood now. As for my siblings, we've grown closer in ways I never anticipated. My oldest brother and his wife are expecting their 3rd child. My other brother and his family moved closer to them, and they're actually talking about starting a business together. My sister finally let me meet her girlfriend of 3 years. She was too afraid to come out to our parents while they were together. They're planning a commitment ceremony next spring. Last month, we all gathered at my mother's for Thanksgiving, all of us, including DC. It was the first time all the siblings had been in the same room in over a decade. My father wasn't invited, but nobody mentioned him, which felt like progress in itself. That's not to say everything is perfect. My ex still lingers on the periphery of my life like a ghost. I cashed the check he gave me, but not before sitting on it for months. I finally decided to donate half to a domestic violence shelter and use the other half to take DC on a weekend trip to the mountains. Turning something painful into something positive felt right. I ran into my ex-BFF's sister at the grocery store a few months ago. She was with a man I didn't recognize and a baby in a carrier. Our eyes met across the produce section, and for a moment, I thought she might run. Instead, she came over. "I know you don't owe me anything," she said, "but I want you to know I'm sorry. What we did was unforgivable." She told me she'd been in therapy, got divorced, met someone new who actually respects me, and had a baby. She looked happy, healthier. I just nodded and said, "I hope it works out for you this time." And I meant it. I'm not interested in carrying other people's guilt anymore. As for DC, or Cheeseburger, as he's still saved in my phone, he asked me to marry him. Not in some grand, public gesture, but on a random Tuesday morning while we were brushing our teeth. He didn't even have a ring. "I don't need an answer right now," he said, toothpaste foam at the corner of his mouth. "But I want you to know that you're it for me." I made him wait a month for my answer, not because I was unsure, but because I needed to be certain I was choosing him for the right reasons. I talked it through with my therapist, who asked all the hard questions. Was I afraid of being alone? Was I trying to prove something to my ex? Was I trying to create the family I never had? The answer to all of those was no. The truth was much simpler. I love him. I love how he hums while he cooks. I love how he calls his grandparents every Sunday without fail. I love that he still checks on me when I'm having a bad day, not to fix it, but just to sit with me through it. So I said yes. No ring, no fuss. We're planning a small ceremony next fall. My mother is already planning to make centerpieces for the tables. My sister insisted on being my best woman. Even my father called to congratulate us, though he did add "if you're sure this time," which earned him a week of silence from me. There have been some unexpected challenges. DC got laid off when his company downsized, and for a few tense months, we were living on my income alone. He threw himself into job hunting, but also took over most of the household duties without me having to ask. He learned to make my grandmother's lasagna recipe, kept the apartment spotless, and never once made me feel like I was carrying the financial burden alone. He found a better job last month, better pay, better hours. On his first payday, he came home with a tiny box. Inside was a simple ring with a small sapphire instead of a diamond. "Because blue is your favorite color," he said, "and because I want to promise you something real, not just something expensive." Therapy continues to be hard, but necessary. I've had to confront some ugly truths about myself, how I've used anger as armor, how I've punished others to avoid feeling my own pain, how I've kept myself isolated to avoid being hurt again. The hardest session was when my therapist asked me to write letters to both my parents that I would never send. I wrote my mother's easily, full of love and forgiveness. My father's was harder. I started it a dozen times, angry at first, then sad, then resigned. In the end, I wrote, "I wish you had loved us enough to be a better man." My therapist asked me to read it aloud, and I couldn't get through it without breaking down. DC found me sitting in my car afterward, unable to drive home because I was crying so hard. He didn't say anything, just got in the passenger seat and held my hand until I was ready to go. That night, I called my father and asked if we could have lunch the following week. Just the two of us. I don't know what I'm going to say to him yet, but I know I'm done hiding from the hard conversations. Life isn't perfect. I still have nightmares sometimes. I still flinch when DC comes home later than expected. I still catch myself scanning his phone when he leaves it on the counter. But I'm learning that trust isn't about certainty, it's about choosing to believe in someone even when you're afraid. It's about understanding that love is always a risk, but some people are worth the risk. Last week, we were out with friends when someone asked how we met. DC started telling the story. She was having dinner with her parents, and then she went nuclear on them, and everyone laughed. Someone asked, "And you still asked her out after that?" DC looked at me, smiling. "Especially after that. How often do you meet someone brave enough to burn everything down and start over?" I don't know if what I did was brave or just desperate. I don't know if I would have had the courage to say those things to my parents if I hadn't just had my heart broken. I don't know if I would have ever learned to trust again if DC hadn't shown up with a cheeseburger on my worst day. What I do know is this: sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you really need. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who teach you the most important lessons. Sometimes the universe sends you exactly the right person at exactly the right moment. And sometimes, that person sends you a double cheeseburger when you're hungover and heartbroken. And that changes everything.